Hello there, my friends. Hank here, and if you guys have been watching the channel for some time, you probably know I build World War II models, and this is not that. I decided to try my hand at a modern jet for the first time ever, and I think it went pretty well. So let's talk about it. If you're thinking about taking the plunge and building up your first scale model modern jet fighter, then this one is for you. Now, this beauty in front of me here is Tamiya's 1/48 scale McDonnell Douglas F-15C Eagle air superiority fighter, first released back in 1991. It's over 30 years old now, a classic kit by most standards, but being a Tamiya production, I'd say it still holds up pretty well. Not without some challenges, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but first a little overview of the bird itself. Now, the story of the Eagle begins way back during the Vietnam War, during which the U.S. Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps were seeing some worrying results with the capabilities of their current roster of aircraft when it came to facing enemy fighters in the skies over Southeast Asia. During the Cold War, the thought process was that big, beefy interceptors loaded with long-range missiles and high-tech radar were the way to go, a la the F-4 Phantom II. But reality was showing that these bigger, heavily armed birds were proving to be quite vulnerable to the smaller, cheaper, and older MiG day fighters employed by the Vietnamese. These MiG-21s and MiG-17s were tough to hit with mid to long-range missiles, and once they were able to lure these Phantoms to within visual range, they were much easier pickings for these more maneuverable Soviet fighters. So, eventually, the US presses the need for an air superiority fighter that would be the force to be reckoned with when it came to air-to-air combat, and the solution came in the form of the good old F-15. Now, the first McDonnell Douglas F-15 would join the U.S. Air Force in 1974, and she's been in service with nations all around the world ever since. And did that air superiority thing work out? I'd say. The Eagle boasts a 104-0 air-to-air combat record. To this day, she's never lost a fight toe-to-toe. So, to this day, this 40-year-old design is still holding down the fort pretty well with many units throughout the U.S. military and is finally getting close to a well-deserved retirement planned for 2026. So, with that said, let's talk a little bit about the kit itself. As mentioned, the kit first hit shelves back in 1991, so it's definitely a bit dated compared to Tamiya's newer offerings, especially, but I figured it would be a good place to start as a complete novice when it comes to modern fighters, such as myself. The kit consists of 5 sprues of light gray plastic, as well as 1 transparent sprue of all of our clear parts. Construction begins, as you'd expect, with the cockpit. Nothing really to write home about here. It's just flat, unmolded parts with a very simple stick and throttle setup. The builder has to rely on kit decals for all of the instrumentation. That said, if you are looking to get really into the interior here, you could certainly go with some aftermarket supplies, but I decided to keep this out of the box and button up the canopy, and we'll get to that later. Construction then proceeds through an option for air intake ramp positioning and the assembly of the radar in the nose before all of these components get settled into the lower half of the fuselage. By step 4, we're ready to mate the top and the bottom halves of the fuselage itself. Now, the instructions call for these to be temporarily taped together, and I would say, don't listen to that. One of the biggest problems I had with this kit was the seam between the top and the bottom half of the aircraft. The fit was okay, but it's an old kit. I had to really do a lot of finagling to get everything to line up properly, and I had to hold the parts just so while the cement cured. I'm really glad I cemented these two halves together at this stage in the build, because if I had waited, it would have been a nightmare later on. So, with that said, expect step 4 to take some time and a little bit of patience, and definitely a bit of filler, putty, and a decent amount of sanding before you can move on there. Steps 5 and 6 take us through the wing and horizontal stabilizer assembly, as well as the addition of our nozzles in the back here. No issues at all. Everything fit together quite well. And then steps 7 through 10 are all about landing gear assembly. The kit does provide some nice little metal struts to hide inside the gear supports, which was a nice touch to ensure that this big kit sits comfortably and safely. Nothing overly detailed or complicated about the gear, though the kit does provide options to position the gear covers opened as well as closed for the extended gear, as well as closed covers for retracted gear. So plenty of options for how you want to display this bird. Steps 11 and 12 are all about ordnance and external tanks. The kit comes with a pretty healthy assortment of equipment, including 4 AIM-7 Sparrows, 4 AIM-9 Sidewinders, 2 countermeasure pods, and 3 external fuel tanks. I chose to add everything except for the countermeasure pods. But at this point, I will say, I went ahead and mounted the 3 fuel tanks prior to painting and left all the missiles off until afterwards. Considerably easier to paint them up that way rather than mounting them and just trying to do all that. So just paint them separately and super glue them in place at the end. And our final bits for construction were to mount the seat, the HUD, and the canopy itself. I chose to button the canopy up, as previously mentioned, because of the relatively sparse cockpit details. Fortunately, I will say, the main canopy is very nicely molded in one clear piece without any seam lines, which does save the headache of trying to sand and polish that all down like I've heard you have to do on Tamiya's F-16 offerings. So, all in all, the build itself was pretty simple. Again, with the exception of the fuselage, things went together quite well. Moving on to painting, I had to get myself some new paints for this project as I didn't have any modern USAF colors. I ordered this set from Vallejo, and it worked out pretty well. I primed the kit with some black primer, painted the gear wells with satin white, masked those off, and then airbrushed in the main camouflage with light ghost gray, and the secondary color with some dark ghost gray. Color differences are pretty subtle and desaturated, but I do like the final look. As for the markings on this aircraft, I wanted to do this up in my local Air National Guard scheme, the 104th Fighter Wing, based here in Massachusetts, and I was lucky enough to find a really great aftermarket decal pack from Speed Hunter Graphics. I'd never used these guys before, but I was very impressed. Super nice, very thin decals that went on quite well with a little bit of microset and some microsol. The flag decal on the front here was pretty stressful, I will say, being so large and really delicate, but as mentioned, turned out pretty well. Back in 2021, the flagship of the 104th Fighter Wing received this new nose art that depicts the American flag made up of the names of the hundreds of servicemen and women in the 104th, as well as the names of those lost in service with the 104th over the years, commemorated in special gold lettering. I will leave a link down in the description below for this real aircraft if you'd be interested in reading a little bit more about that whole process later on. All in all, I really enjoyed this project. It was a great way to mix things up and put me out of my comfort zone a bit. This thing is absolutely enormous. Holding it up even against one of my 148 scale B-17s, this thing is huge, and partially for that reason, I don't think I'm going to be knocking out a bunch of modern aircraft anytime soon. I do love my 148 scale, but these things are way too big for practical storage and display, at least in my current setup here. But it was really fun to do. What a beautiful, sharp, scary-looking bird. A real force to be reckoned with. The kit, as mentioned, was pretty simple, not a lot of detail, but the detail that was there was extremely well done, per Tamiya, and it definitely got the job done for my purposes. So, if you're looking to try out a modern jet for the first time, I'd definitely recommend giving this kit a go. It was a great project, relaxing, and I learned quite a bit along the way. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I'll be rolling the clock back to the 40s again after this, fear not. But thank you for watching, and until next time, my friends, be well, happy building, cheers.